Hi everyone, today I'm going to paint this rifle and these two scopes. Not too long ago I painted another black rifle with a scope and I used black and gray colors, and I also used these plants and this netting. And a friend of mine saw it and he asked me if I could paint his, and he wanted it the same exact way except for not so much of the netting, but more of the plants. So these are the only instructions I have. I am able to paint this second scope maybe a little bit differently, but I am going to keep the same black and gray color. I am going to use sponges. I never do anything twice the same, so it will look the same, but it will be a little bit different. I had 3 different types of sponges. 2 of them were the inexpensive ones you could even buy at the dollar store, and this one was a more fancy one. It cost me $15. It doesn't matter what you have, you want to practice with them just to see what kind of pattern they leave. You can also kind of smudge them a little bit, go a little lighter, a little stronger, so you know what to expect. And this one was my favorite. This is just a regular household sponge. I really like the pattern. Unfortunately, it didn't really transfer the same way to a curved surface as it did onto a flat one, but it's still good to see what you can get out of them. This is the scope that will go on a different rifle. So I was able to experiment with using just the sponge. So what I did was I added first a wraparound pattern using the darker gray just to see what it will look like, what I can do with it. And then I added the lighter gray, which actually showed up kind of like white. So I didn't even use it on the gun and the other scope because I thought it was a little too strong. I did like it. I do like the way it looks, but I wanted it to be able to blend in with whatever rifle it will go with. So then I added layers of black, layers of the darker gray. I was able to also mix the color and just kind of kept going with different layers until I reached the desired effect and the desired look, which I wanted it to be subtle. The net can be a little bit tricky. There are basically 2 ways to do it. You can either tape it to the surface or you can just hold it. So I'm using both techniques throughout this video. In this case here, as you can see, I couldn't really figure out what would look the best. So I ended up just squeezing it really tight and holding it. And I already got used to having paint go on my hand all over. I can't use any gloves. It just doesn't feel right. I want to be able to feel what I'm touching and what I'm holding. The paint will come off. By the next day, the paint always just came off of my hands, so that wasn't a problem. In my opinion, it's best if you start with the net. You're going to place it in certain areas and it's going to be rather large, but then you're going to cover it with something else anyways. So you need to lay that first and then you end up covering it up. You don't want to put that last. I don't know if it would look right. And don't be afraid of making mistakes. I already painted that paint a little too heavy the very first time around, but I knew I was going to cover it anyways. And I also was very hopeful with this sponge. As you could see, I'm already covering all kinds of areas. I wanted to start with the bottom because it needs to be painted anyways and might as well figure out what it will look like because this is still new to me. So I have done my scope with just the sponge, but I haven't done it where I'm using plants, the net, and the sponge. So I wanted to see what it would look like. And then as I went along, I got more and more comfortable with it. So here are a few tips. Don't forget about the top and the bottom. So you're not only painting the two sides, but you need to do all those areas too, as well as the smaller areas, little corners and little things here and there, especially this area right here that's actually parallel to the floor. So this is the horizontal part, not the vertical part of the gun, because when you're just spraying forward, you're not gonna hit that area, but it does need to be touched up. And finally, a very important point, don't do it the way I did it. So I had this gun stand up on a bipod because I wanted to save some time and do both sides at the same time. But that's not good because your paint can drip. It is always best if you can actually paint on a horizontal surface. So it is better to lay the gun down on one side and finish one side and then let it dry, give it some time, and then turn it over and do the other side. You are going to save yourself a lot of trouble. I would actually not recommend doing it like this, like wrapping it around and taping it to the surface, because you could totally mess up the paint when you take it off because it's wrapped around it. And I wasn't really thinking. And then when it was time to take it off, I was like, oh my gosh, how is this going to work? I got totally lucky. So the paint did not smear, but as you could see, it could have as I was moving the net over it. So don't do it like this. Try to do it in smaller sections maybe, and then just try to line it up. I was doing two things with the sponge. The first one was fixing mistakes. So sometimes the paint kind of splatters when you spray it, no matter what you do. And sometimes it actually looks okay, but other times it just doesn't look right and you need to cover it. So the sponge is a really good tool for that. Other times you might have smeared the paint or it just didn't look right. So it's a really easy way to fix it. So that was one thing. The other thing was I was just trying to cover areas where it was just plain paint. So like an area where it was just gray or it was just black and nothing else. I didn't want to keep adding the plant because then it's too busy. So with the sponge, I was able to achieve this sort of textured marbled look. And I was just going in different layers. So I added the gray, then I added the black, and then I even had the two different colors of paint on that plate. And I was just able to mix them together. And that's what I like about the sponge. You can completely mix the color. There are no rules here. You can just do whatever you want. You can just play with it and experiment with it. One more thing I want to point out, I think it's so much better if the sponge is wet. So this is why you want to have a small container with some water and some paper towels. So you dip the sponge in the water and then squeeze out all of it and dab it onto the paper towel, and then you dip it in the paint. It will look so much better. You only need to do this once in a while. That sponge will stay pretty wet. You can even play around with the wetness. You just need to make sure it will have enough time to dry. Overall, I accomplished what I was looking for. I wanted to use the sponge because I felt that if I cover everything with the plant, it would just stand out too much because I'm only using two colors. I'm using the black and the darker gray. The light gray would be too light, so I didn't even use it. So I felt that I needed the sponge to kind of fill in the gaps here and there. If I was using the traditional camouflage colors like two shades of green, a brown, a beige, black, then it's a lot more busier and then the plants would look a lot better. So I'm happy that I was able to play around with it because every time I learn something new and I think it matches, it looks good. So I'm happy. So this scope, the one when I was only using the sponge, this will go on another gun. I like it. It's much more subtle. So if you're looking for subtlety, the sponge is the way to go. You can definitely use more colors. I would recommend using a super dark blue. You can actually mix the black and the blue. That's what I really like about this. You can custom match your colors, and I think that would add a really nice dimension to it. So I am very happy that I get to paint all these things because I ran out of things to paint a long time ago. That's why I didn't do this for a couple of years. But I also have another gun that I was given to paint. It's a beautiful AR-10. It's a 13-pound rifle, and I usually don't get excited about guns. To me, they're just a tool to shoot, to hunt, and that's it. But this one is really beautiful. My friend's husband built it, and he asked me to paint it. But the thing is, he wants me to do these crazy, intricate designs on it that I would never attempt with a spray paint. I mean, I would if it was like a really big surface, but not on a gun, on something small. So I have actually bought an airbrush, and I'm going to experiment with it and do that for my next video. So if you're interested in seeing that, then come back. Hopefully I get to post it next week. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions or anything you want to tell me, just please leave me a comment, and I will see you next time.